Hey guys, Argent Templar here. So this will probably get me a lot of hate, but it's something that needs to be said. And this is something I've been noticing for years. And I've been saying this ever since I used to listen to Glenn Beck, back when Rand Paul was first starting his campaign for president, back when the NSA scandal broke. I just like to go on the record as saying I was against the NSA scandal. I'm against the police state in general. I think the police state is a result of diversity. I think in a society that's less enriched, we really don't need a police state. Actually, it's kind of abhorrent to me. I just don't really like totalitarianism. You can call it my Anglo background. I don't really like government kicking down people's doors. I acknowledge that if we were to try and achieve the society we would have to have purges, particularly of bureaucrats and university people, but that's not the general population. Those tend to be people in explicitly political, explicitly public areas, which to me is different than the private or even semi-public sphere. But I digress. So a trend I've been noticing for the last couple decades. I'm only 24, but what I've been noticing even over the course of my life and looking back historically is the death of the social right and the death of the economic left. If you notice, the economic left, or just the left in general, is not interested in economic issues anymore. They don't talk about nationalizing industry. They're against protectionism. They're against workers' rights, I find, in general. Because there are a lot of workers' rights issues. There's a lot of abusive things that go on, particularly with regards to minimum wage. And while they kind of throw a couple bones occasionally to kind of the more old school populist economic left, in general, they just seem very disinterested in it. Obama didn't pass public health care when he had the chance. He passed some kind of corporate monstrosity. They don't seem to be really capable of raising the minimum wage. Minimum income keeps getting floated. All they really seem to do is just kind of implement some useless regulations that hurt the economy but don't really achieve any kind of grand socialist dream. I kind of feel that the dreams of socialism or really any form of economic leftism just don't really exist anymore. They've kind of become kind of more focused on buying off supporters or attempting to appease their supporters by making it appear they're doing something. And I just don't think there's really an ideological commitment anymore to any sort of state socialism. I think that's deliberate. I think the problem is I think state socialism was inherently nationalistic to a certain degree. I think that was really the only feasible way to motivate a population. The Soviet Union discovered that during World War II, where they gradually had to abandon a lot of their internationalist rhetoric and become more and more nationalistic and call it the Great Patriotic War and talk about Mother Russia, etc. And that was really the only way to invoke the sense of shared sacrifice. And if we look at kind of the collectivist states that actually functioned, they tended to be fascist states. And those were states that were based on a strong sense of national identity, of race, of ethnicity, of culture, etc. Collectivism is very hard in a generic sense. So we see the left kind of leaving this collectivism behind. I mean, they've left the welfare state intact, but if you notice, they haven't really talked much about new entitlement programs. They don't really even talk about expanding the ones they have anymore, aside from just kind of minor tweaks here and there. If they talk in economically left-wing terms, it's kind of just vague populism. We just don't see any of the kind of stuff we saw even 50 years ago, when the Labour Party nationalized a bunch of British industry, when Canada and a lot of Western countries, they nationalized things, when they attempted to restrict private capital, etc. We get a host of new regulations, but practically speaking, not much really changes. There's a lot of... The current economic system, as bad as it is very stable. There's really no one in society who has the will to change it. So I would argue that the economic differences between the modern left and right are almost non-existent. People say, well, the right favors lower taxes, which is it's theoretically true, but the right runs up bigger debts. It's just kind of a fact. In general, if you look at most Western countries, generally speaking, center-right governments are much more financially irresponsible. They generally up the debt a lot more, and I know Obama's kind of an exception, but generally speaking, if you elect a fiscally conservative government, I find in my experience, they will increase the debt more than a socialist government will. So, like, theoretically, they're in favor of lower taxes, but what they're actually in favor of is indirect taxation on the next generation through unsustainable levels of debt, as opposed to making people pay for it at the moment. So I don't see a fundamental difference between them. I think they both kind of accepted free market capitalism. They both, I think, have accepted kind of the view, even if the left makes claims in the other direction, that you're more or less a serf. That you're a serf. You're basically, your employer owns you. If you have a job, you're lucky to have a job. Within that job, your rights are very limited. There just isn't, I find, any real talk of dramatic change in a very bad economic standpoint. There's not really a talk of reforming minimum wage jobs. People will vaguely talk about the job creation, but just very little substantive is ever done anymore. It's mostly just rhetorical, I find, differences in economics. I find different governments more or less pursue nearly identical economic policies regardless of who's in power. So it's all neoliberal. All parties are agreed that low interest rates are good. All parties agree that savings is bad, that people shouldn't save money. All people agree that personal debt levels are good. All parties agree that national debt is good. All parties agree that trade balances are good. Negative trade balances are good. That shipping jobs overseas is good. That industry doesn't need to be protected. That workers' rights don't mean anything. That unlimited immigration is necessary for economic growth. And that, broadly speaking, with a couple exceptions like Viktor Orban, that low birth rates are a good thing. Women not getting married is a good thing. So in terms of how economic policy is structured, I think by and large they're all kind of center right. The tax rate is like that, but I kind of feel there is a growing consensus, and I think over time you will see a lot of Western countries dismantle their welfare states. I find particularly the younger generation of people on the left have come to embrace kind of more anarchist economics. Something I keep hearing, particularly from the conservatives, is that economic conservatism is succeeding. So they'll talk about the younger generation being conservative in the context that they want lower taxes and they want more free market. And really, that's the only way they define political ideology, is how much in favor of the free market you are. So to me, that kind of states, because many of these people that they're referring to as being conservative are extremist social liberals. They believe in transracialism. They believe in transsexualism. They believe in unlimited immigration. They believe in hate speech laws. They believe in letting people starve in the street, etc. So these people, though, are conservative in the eyes of most of the current establishment because they want lower tax rates. So the next generation of leftists will be smaller government Marxists. And in general, I call small government Marxist a libertarian. So yeah, the right has really, to a large extent, abandoned any social, cultural, identity-based politics. And they have more or less adopted the left's position on all these issues. I don't see any functional difference between either party. I feel what happened was center-right economics won in terms of the economic battle, and social leftism, to my extent, in my view, kind of extreme leftism won in terms of the social issues. So to me, what this kind of leads to is this increasing bridge between libertarianism and leftism. And what I increasingly find is people making libertarian arguments to support left-wing causes. I find a lot of the SJWs will make libertarian arguments. Particularly when I'm dealing with baby boomers, they will also make a lot of libertarian arguments. So what do I mean? to a certain extent, I think globalism is a form of individualism, because it posits that you're just a human being living on the planet Earth, which is as I'm getting to is kind of both the libertarian and the left wing perspective of what life is. You're just born. You're born a blank slate. Everything about you doesn't really matter. Any value that's placed in your biological, cultural, familial, etc., is just a social construct. It doesn't have any meaning. Your race doesn't have any meaning. Your nation doesn't have any meaning. Both libertarians and the left will embrace, for example, the idea that you can't choose what country you're born in, so there's no point in being proud of it. You can't choose what gender you're born, so there's no point in being proud of it. Gender roles are a social construct. There's no difference between men and women. You should just treat everyone as an individual. Both kind of will embrace the non-aggression principle that the only time you're allowed to use force is if someone uses force against you. So basically, I find both sides take the position that in general, society should just be should be entirely focused on the individual. That any sort of collective or group responsibility, if it exists as a citizen of the world. Now both sides have a slightly different view, but it's kind of more sophistry and nuance than anything. A libertarian says, I have no responsibility to anyone, I have no identity beyond myself, and I live on the planet Earth. The leftist will say, I am a citizen of the world. So there's some slight differences in how they view that you have to correct this. The left believes that you have to have re-education, you have to arrest people and throw them in jail, etc. And libertarians more or less, it's weird. And this is kind of what it comes to my general issue with libertarianism and leftism and why I find them essentially the same. I don't know how you would establish a libertarian state or promote libertarian ideology without force, because you won't ever get most people to agree with it. Because much like leftism takes the position that we can't judge anyone for anything. But there's an exception to that where if you do believe you can judge someone for something, then if you believe you can judge someone from something, then you can be judged. So their whole premise is self-refuting. And I think to a certain extent things like the non-aggression principle and just the idea of libertarianism in general necessitates that everybody holds that view, and that you have to actively destroy or repress people who do not hold to that viewpoint. Because otherwise what will happen is people will say, well, we don't want to live in this individualistic, atomized society. We want a society where there's a collective identity, where there's social and moral obligations, maybe where there's a state religion. And the libertarian will say, well, that's impedes on individual freedom, and because someone in that society might object to it, we can't have that society. And there's kind of this universalism to both of them that rejects the concept that anyone has a right to form a collective society or an ideological society under any grounds. You can't be allowed to form them because their ideas are inherently open-ended, universalistic, and cover the entirety of the world. There's also the issue that both systems tend to produce, in leftism's case, it produces a dildo society that's completely incapable of defending itself. The few matriarchal societies we've had in history were completely destroyed by patriarchal ones with little effort. They just blew through them just because they're so much weaker. A libertarian society, if we were to go full on ANCAP, would just be immediately crushed by a more centralized state. So inherently, it has to exist as a global concept or not at all. Like, let's say America, or I don't know, just some country went to become like an ANCAP state. Some country like China could just steamroll them because they have centralized economic planning, they have centralized power. They could just raise an army and go through, and they're like, well, we'd form citizen militias. Okay, but citizen militias I don't think can really raise necessarily jet planes, or at least enough jet planes to be able to fight off a real army. Besides that, libertarianism also requires that everyone else hold to their viewpoint. So what do you do with people who don't believe in the non-aggression principle? With people who don't want to live in a society like that? The libertarian argument would be, well, you have to accept it. You have to accept that you can't influence me, that I have no responsibilities, and that you have no responsibilities, etc. And it's I find in both cases it's universal, because they'll say, well, if you don't like it, go move somewhere else. Which is necessarily saying to me that you have no right to live here. If you disagree with me, you have to go move to another country, which is fine, but that's extremely moralistic and judgmental, which, as I said, I'm fine with. I actually acknowledge the left's... I think it's legitimate, more or less, for the left to jail political opposition, because it's probably what I would do if I was in power. And it's just kind of a logical thing to do. I accept their premise that repressing political opposition, the ends justify the means. I accept that. So yeah, so they're both universal. Leftism necessitates you have a society where no one's allowed to say, "Oh, I want to just be with people like myself. I just want to be with people of my own religion. I don't want democracy." If you notice, people are never allowed to vote against democracy. They're never allowed to vote against diversity. The questions are never even put to them, because that would be an infringement of their worldview of this global atomized population. So, hopefully I've explained this. Let's just go over a couple additional views. Gay marriage, I find the left and libertarians make the exact same argument. People are individuals. They should be free to do what they want as long as they're not harming anyone else, because both deny the existence of society. So who cares if it's bad for society? Who cares if it's going to be harmful for a lot of people? All that matters is the individual. The concept of society they view as some sort of evil that is created by... basically people who they view as subhuman. So there's no society, there's no culture, there's no sense of greater responsibility. Same thing with drug use. It doesn't matter what's bad for society. What matters is what feels good for me and what respects my natural rights. The concept of gender roles, everyone's an individual. You can't make any sort of generalizations. But I think the point which I'm trying to make is they're both full of shit. They both try to impose their ideologies on people. Libertarianism could only really exist within the context of a military dictatorship that basically forced it upon the population and prevented anyone from attempting to change the system. Similarly, leftism can only exist in a context in which a essentially authoritarian government enforces diversity, enforces immigration without consulting the public, who would, generally speaking, vote against it. So I guess my point is, I view them basically as two sides of the same coin. I kind of view the center-right libertarianism and the center-left as all being more or less the same ideology, with the only major differences being on the matter of economics. So I'm sorry if this video is rambling and incoherent. This is Argent Templar signing out.